Hi, I'm Sandhya Shekhar, and I have with me Smriti Rekha, who is my co host. And welcome to Nothing is Rocket Science, a podcast where we discuss the nuances of science behind everything. Uh, in today's episode, we have with us Dr. Channa Prakash, who is the Dean of College of Arts and Sciences at Tuskegee University in Alabama. He served as a faculty there since 1989, and he's a professor of crop genetics and biotechnology. His research is primarily on the genetic improvement of crops of importance in developing countries. And besides that, he's also a leading proponent of science based agricultural development, especially in the use of molecular techniques, including genetically modified crops and genome engineering. He also provides technical, societal, and ethical perspectives on these issues through his lectures and writings on social media. So, without further ado, welcome Dr. Prakash to this podcast.
Thank you.
Before we actually start off with discussing today's agenda, I know I used a lot of buzzwords, so I want you to simplify what you actually do,
Sure.
so that our general audience are aware of what exactly is genome, what is genetic engineering, and what is agricultural biotechnology. Yep.
Certainly. I see agricultural biotechnology is a very broad set of words. It's a word that encompasses a broad meaning using any biological entities, any living organisms to help improve humankind is what biotechnology is all about. And if it's in the area of agriculture, if you use, and so, agriculture has always been biotechnology because agriculture is about using living things to help provide products for us. If you are getting curds today for lunch, the curds came from the cows, the milk, but the milk was turned into the curds by some bacteria that you may not see, you may not know about, but they did the job for you. And as you know, the curds or cheese, uh, we have been using it for thousands of years. And so biotechnology has been with us
Right.
without us really recognizing for thousands of years. But in today, the modern biotechnology that what we are talking about is entails the use of recombinant DNA. It is where scientists working in the lab literally study the genes within the cells of our body or other organisms like bacteria or virus. And then now we can not only study those genes, but we have the power to take a gene from one organism, say a bacteria, and put it into a cotton plant, and to make those cotton plants produce some proteins of that bacteria in a way that they could help keep the pests away. You see? So those are what we call as a genetically modified crop or
Mm-hmm.
GM crop, and that is a subset of biotechnology. Another
Mm-hmm.
subset of biotechnology is what we call as a genomics, which simply studying large number of genes at a time. And we have many other branches within computational biology where we use computers to study these genes because we know these genes, we have literally 30, 40,000 genes in our body. And the DNA is about 3, 4 billion nucleotides in each cell. So we need massive computers to understand what is going on in our cell. And so increasingly, this computational biology, and it also more and more brings in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and lots of other high technology into that. And we also have very simple biotechnology such as plant tissue culture. Many of
Mm-hmm.
the beautiful plants that you see in India today, when you go to a nursery or so you can see a lot of good landscaping that you see around the apartments and malls. Some of those were developed in test tubes. They were really
Right.
not genetically engineered, but they were just propagated in test tubes just so that we could do literally millions of identical clones of plants from a single one. So there are very many different types of biotechnology. Most of them are really not controversial. But one, the GMO that you mentioned, is one that people have some hesitancy towards that,
Right.
and that
Yeah.
primarily stems from lack of good knowledge on what this is about,
Right.
and doubts about its safety.
Right. It's a good segue because that is exactly what I wanted to talk about in our first segment.
Sure.
So, what is genetically modified organism, like the GMO that we
Hmm.
keep hearing about in supermarkets or in the news or in any kind of article? And if you could also touch upon why do we need what is the need for GMO,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
as to in and if GMO is just applied only to plants, because when we say GMO, it says genetically modified organism. So is that organism just plant, or do we apply that to other organisms, other living
Very good
organisms too?
question. Yeah, certainly. See, in the very basic sense, a GMO simply means an organism to which a foreign gene has been introduced. So if you're just developing some rose plants or rice by crossing with each other, I mean, crossing rice with other rice to develop new variety of rice. That was how a lot of our varieties were developed, like Coimbatore Sanna is a very famous rice variety in the south.
Mm-hmm.
It was developed, probably 100 years ago by selecting from other rice. But in more recently, a lot of plants were being hybridized. Like if you go, a lot of beautiful petunias that they plant in India. Many of them are even tomatoes. They are hybrids where they
Right.
just take one variety of tomato, A, variety B, and they develop. So that is not genetically modified because they use classic
Right.
hybridization technique. Or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people have used mutations when you can't find a good flower color. Like let's say you want a blue rose. No, there is no such thing as a blue rose. So
Right.
they tried a lot of radiation and chemicals to make changes and this was like 60, 80 years ago. And so we've been using all kinds of different techniques to create variation in our croplands or even animals, but that has a very slow method of making change, and many of the changes cannot be made the way we want it. For instance, to give an example, do you know that there are about 140,000 varieties of rice in this world? And you
I'm,
probably
I'm
when you
not
go to,
surprised. I'm not surprised. I didn't
right,
know
but
the
when you
exact
go to the
number.
market, you see three or four, five types. That's all.
Right.
But these are the like in India, for instance, in Tamil Nadu, where Smriti is right now, every family had its own variety of rice. Okay, everyone had their own variety of rice, and that was passed on from generation to generation. It is like we call it heirloom, just like jewelry, but was
Yeah.
passed on from mother to daughter. But when the new varieties of rice came along, a lot of people stopped growing their old family rice. But those old family rices were very critical. They may have good genes, they may have a good taste, they may be resistant to drought or some pest. And so, and in scientific laboratories, we started collecting those rices. Anyway, the point I was trying to make is, out of 140,000 varieties of rice, there is not single one of them that has any vitamin A in it. Okay? There's no rice in the world that can produce vitamin A in its grain. And so, because of rice eating people, and like a lot of us South Indians, but all over Asia, it be, people who only eat rice and poor people who can't afford to eat anything else, they are suffering from vitamin A
Deficiency.
deficiency, which in serious cases causes blindness in
Right.
children and even death. And so, to address that problem, scientists have taken a gene from maize. Okay, the maize kernels have beautiful yellow color. That is
Mm-hmm.
because of the provitamin A called beta carotene in that, the
Beta
same in
carotene. Yeah.
carrot. So you
In
could take
carrots.
a
Yeah.
gene from maize or carrot and put it into rice, then it becomes a GMO. Okay,
Oh,
so as
okay.
you can see, and this rice can help the people if it is if it could be grown, and if people consume that, those especially those who have vitamin A, because it is rice and it tastes like rice, it looks like rice, there's no difference, but it just has one gene from maize. And that is the both the solution and the problem with GMO. is that the solution is that it gives you a wide opportunity by using this technique to bring any genes from any living organisms or even non-living. We can synthesize a gene and put
Right.
it into the plants to make it
Mm.
do whatever we want to do. And so, why your first question is why are what is GMO? Now, the second is why do we need this? Frankensteinian monstrous lab lab produced vegetable or grain?
Mhm.
Because a lot of people who are kind of who are into science fiction or don't know, they think and they may think, yeah, these scientists are crazy. Why are they putting all these kinds of genes and messing with nature, right? That's our gut response to these kinds of things. But really, you need to understand that, look, we have been, the rice that you grow today in India, the tomato that you eat, and and all the other vegetables, fruits, they have been continuously been modified by
Mhm.
our forefathers and foremothers. They were all wild plants once when we were living in Stone Age. And when we started beginning agriculture, it's not like all these crops just dropped from the sky. What we did was to go and see what was growing around us and slowly take the seeds from that. And then many of them were bitter, growing too tall and falling off. And so we had to
Mhm.
take some desirable types from that and slowly modify it over a period of thousands of years. Okay, that's
Right.
what they did to get corn in Mexico. This is what they did rice in Asia and China, and barley and wheat were domesticated in the Middle East, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And GMO is just one other newer technique in our toolbox to bring better varieties of plants. You see, the main reason, argument why we need GM and many other newer techniques is simply because the humanity was 1.5 billion 100 years ago in the population on Earth. Okay, today is 7.5 billion, and experts predict that by 2050 will be about 9 billion or 9.5 billion people. Okay, and we have done a good job in the past 100 years of feeding most of these people, but still a billion people go to bed hungry every day today, even in the
Mhm.
21st century. And
Right.
not only that, agriculture, while we have done a good job, has had a lot of negative environmental impact. We have used
Right.
too much fertilizer, we've
Right.
used too much pesticide, and if you drive around lots of places in India, you see how the soil erosion has occurred, and this was mainly because of the mismanagement of agriculture. Okay, and sometimes farmers without too much knowledge, not good knowledge, or sometimes even greedy and then also indulging in destructive practices that's not necessarily backed by science. But nevertheless, a lot of food expansion also occurred because we cut down valuable forests, such beautiful virgin forests that we have in our Malnadu, in Tamil Nadu, and in Kerala. If you go, Silent Valley, they are all extraordinary hotspots of biodiversity. You'll never
Right.
find anywhere in the world, even the Himalayas. And you could see what's happening in Indonesia, and where they're cutting forests to plant oil palm, or in Brazil where they're cutting down forests to plant
Right.
soybean. And so humanity simply cannot afford to cut down one more acre of forest, because the loss of some of those valuable species is just gone forever. But still, we need to feed these people, feed them
Right.
nutritionally. But to do it sustainably, we need to come up with scientific farming practices that would help minimize the use of chemicals, help minimize use of even just plowing the land itself is very destructive, and not use many chemicals that harm the environment, and yet produce food that is safer, healthier, less toxins, less allergens. And also, we have a huge sword hanging above our head in the form of global climate change. And
Right.
global climate change, the biggest negative impact is going to be on agriculture, because in
Mhm.
agriculture is always at the mercy of the environment,
Right.
and too much heat, uh, too
Seasonal
hot,
changes. Right.
too little water, too much, all of that, too much water. And so we need to develop croplands that are resilient against all these forces of nature. And so to
Mm-hmm.
do this, we need technology. We need
Right.
variety of technologies, not just one. And we also want to go and see what are our traditional practices, like Vedic practices that Smriti would be interested in, that our forefathers and foremother ancestors practice. So we need everything, all wisdom and
Right.
science and good practices come together. And GMOs is just going to be one of that. In some cases it may be useful, in many cases it may not have any relevance. But it's just like the new vaccine that came out today. There's one vaccine that is proving to be better than all the other vaccines. 200 vaccines are being tested against COVID today, but
Right.
two are they have giving the 99% protection. And is also one where if there is a new variation come out, we can easily reconfigure this vaccine and release that. You know what those two
Mm.
are? Those based on mRNA. And
mRNA.
mRNA
Yep.
has never been used in anything.
Before. Yeah. Yeah.
It was novel concept. This lady who
Right.
developed it was trying to test it against vaccines and it was not working. And
Right.
see, the point I'm trying to make is, in science you don't know what works, what may not work, and we must experiment. We not study all of it and then
Right.
embrace what works, and then we discard what doesn't work.
Yeah. No, I like the way you put that. Like, it's good to experiment and embrace what works. That's a
Exactly.
very good point.
Thank you.
Um,
I have a
come,
question with
yeah,
regard. You had beautifully mentioned in terms of the challenges that we are facing in terms of food culture and that we may face in the future as well. But then there is also in terms of reducing chemical based agriculture. So how does this compare with say natural farming methods or organic farming methods when we are trying to reduce the amount of
Mhm.
chemicals that we're using? So that is one question. The other question is that right now we also see a surge of research related to epigenetics in terms of how
Yes.
the environment impacts. So how is that relevant in this context as well?
It's a very good question. Thank you. I do believe, many of the principles of organic farming and natural farming, like we practice in India, so that's how it was when I was growing up in the 60s. Okay, there was very little use of uh, any extraneous material in the farms. Were simple. We had some animals, and animals provided wastage, and that was the manure.
right,
And we didn't bring anything outside, and the seeds were saved from generations. And so and there was we also practiced a lot of mixed farming. We just didn't depend our lives on just one crop. I remember, like in South India, we always have ragi, uh, and then horse gram mixed, especially in parts which was very dry. Those were the only crops that grew when there was no rain. But those were okay, and still be okay under circumstances when the population density is very small and population pressure is very small. India, and during independence was 44 crores, the population. Bangalore, that I grew up, was less than a million people. Okay, it was a very simple city. You could just walk from one end of the Bangalore to other end. But today it is not like that. Today we have a huge mega cities all over India, whether I go to Chennai or Bombay or Delhi or Calcutta or Hyderabad. Plus, we have you know, people's expectations. When I was a child, I used to get up in the morning, go stand in line in the ration depot just to get some rice, okay, and then stand in the line to just to get kerosene. Do you think your children would be ready to do that today? So your expectations are high, right? Your standard of living, your quality of living in terms of how we do and everything else is high. And so is it in the food. And now you just want to open up your app and order Zomato to to get your idli and puliyodara delivered to your home. So the point is, world has changed since the time when I was growing up, and today's India is different, and it's very sophisticated. Despite the big Kisan thing that is going on in the Delhi, there is really not many farmers who are doing the farming. Their children are not going into the farming. And
Right.
so although 60% or 50% of the people live in rural areas and are directly, indirectly involved in farming, the only 16% of our GDP comes from farming. So the future of India's farming lies in being more streamlined. It lies in being more business-like. And for that, we need to bring in elements of science in a very, very methodical manner so that we could still continue to grow food in the existing amount of land, but using in a very sustainable practices. For that, you need a blending of both your natural farming, organic farming, some of your ideals, but with help from scientific. For instance, let me just give you an example. It's almost impossible to grow some varieties of vegetables in India in a large way without pesticides. Okay, you go into the rural areas, sure, you just step outside and you go visit all those people who are growing tomatoes, cabbage, cauliflower, and brinjal in Tamil Nadu or in Bangalore. You see, they're really literally dumping a lot of pesticides on them, which is very unhealthy, not only for you, but for the whole environment, for the livestock and everything. But on the other hand, if you want to grow them naturally or organically, there are not too many options either, because these pests are really nasty. And when you have that locust coming up, what can
Right.
you do? You saw that last year, that fear. And
Yeah.
that is why it is good to have those principles guiding you, but you should try to seek solutions for that in a modern science. Perhaps instead of spraying pesticides, maybe we could come up with a biological control of those pests, where we can, I have a friend called Venkatesh who runs the largest organic pesticide company in Asia. He exports to 60 countries based out of Hyderabad, and continuously doing research on how we can control all these pests by using biological means. Okay, that is again science based. Biotechnology is behind many of that. And in the same way, GM crops or genomics, a lot of newer technologies are even spraying. Maybe we could make it just a micro dose, that each plant, instead of getting a gram of that pesticide, will only get a milligram of that delivered at a particular stage on only the plant. And that way, when you eat that brinjal after 2 weeks, there won't be any pesticide at all. And that we could do it through drones and again sensors and artificial intelligence. This is called precision farming. We do that with fertilizer. When you apply fertilizer, if you apply 100 kilograms of fertilizer per 1 acre of paddy, the paddy only takes up 10 kilograms. Okay, other 90 kilograms just get washed away, but we still do it because we have no choice. That's the only way we know how to do it. But now, with the technology, we can do micro doses of fertilizer delivered to the root of each and every plant, only in the amount needed, only in when it is needed, and in the
Right.
form it is needed. You see? And this is
Okay.
what the science is doing, that bring down the use of fertilizer by 90% and yet
Right.
almost double the yield compared to what we used to do. Today, they are growing rice outside Dubai. If you Google it and see Dubai and rice, they are growing it again, but it's in exactly the same way. They just bring a little bit of water, they just put some topsoil in there, and then it's like a greenhouse like condition they put on the top, and they are growing rice with those varieties developed in China and in Korea. And so there are a lot of exciting opportunities like that in India, where we can grow many of our crops in those soils right now, which are not fit for agriculture because
Right.
there's not much water or too much salt, and they're eroded.
Okay.
And through innovation and technology, we can rehabilitate them. And not just agriculture, we need a lot more trees. We need all kinds of other components that make our ecosystem very rich.
Right. That's that's really good to learn that bit. Um,
Thank you.
and yeah, like I asked you, so is GMO like Is it limited only to plants, or have we
Okay,
used
yeah,
that for other
I'm sorry, I didn't
organisms too?
address that.
No,
Yeah,
that's okay.
GM,
That's okay.
GMO simply means genetically modified organism. It's kind of an old, obsolete term. We don't necessarily use that in the science too much,
Mhm.
but still it sticks in the general parlance. No,
Mhm.
anything that is modified is a GMO. Believe it
Right.
or not, you and me, we are GMOs too. You
Mhm.
know, because 25% of your DNA that you find in your body has come from viruses. There are retroviruses like
Mhm.
HIV that
Right.
infected our ancestors long time ago and became a part of our body.
Right.
And so GMOs are being used in the lab in the last 30 years. But then when we started doing it, we learned that Mother Nature has been doing GMOs all along. And so
Right.
there has always been, although it's very rare, our crop plants, like we found out, for instance, I work on sweet potatoes, and
Right.
there's one of the
Right.
scientists, when they're working on sweet potatoes, they found that every sweet potato in the world, about 4 or 5 thousand varieties, every one of them has a particular bacterial gene. So that has come from the bacteria. So GMOs are used in plants, in microorganisms. In fact, all the most of the vaccines that are
Mhm.
developed today comes from a GMO. They are produced either in yeast or E. coli. In fact, if you know somebody who is a diabetic, in India we all know somebody who is a diabetic, right?
Mhm.
Somebody who takes insulin,
Right.
right? Do you know someone who takes insulin?
Right.
A lot of our grandparents, my mother used to take it. And you know where that insulin comes from? It comes from a GMO. Today, earlier they used to kill pigs,
Yeah.
even up 10, 15 years ago, and get the
Pancreas insulin from the
insulin
pancreas. Yeah.
right from the pancreas, and then a lot of times there was a problem of introducing pig viruses, from that. Just like SARS, COVID, there is another similar virus that comes from pigs, and
Right.
that was introduced. So that was risky. Whereas GMO, where that gene was taken from humans and put it into yeast producing, and now Dr. Kiran Majumdar Shah in Biocon produces one variant of insulin by this method. So this is a GMO again, and any living organism can be turned into a GMO through introduction of foreign genes.
Mhm.
And again, as I said, it's been happening in nature all the time. It's just that when we do in the lab, kind of people freak
Right.
out.
So basically, it's like a mutation, right? So mutation is nothing but
Exactly.
GMO.
It is
Yeah.
like a mutation. Mutation happens by itself to change the gene, whereas a GMO involves foreign gene transfer. But
Right.
that's when you said mutation, that reminds me of one other thing. Well, a lot of people will still continue to be against any introduction of foreign genes because in their mind it is in violation of nature. How much ever I try to convince them. And so what we are doing in science and industry too, we are moving away from the GMO technology, because this year's Nobel Prize was given to two women. I don't know if you remember,
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Doudna and Michelle Carpentier.
Mm-hmm.
They both discovered an amazing technique called CRISPR. They discovered it's happening in nature and they adapted it. Is where CRISPR helps, a technology that helps to change the DNA from within. It's like creating mutation,
Oh, okay.
and this amazing technology, it was only discovered 7, 8 years ago, has already been used in profound ways. Believe it or not, they've been able to cure sickle cell anemia in people. This is
Oh,
a genetically inborn disease
right.
with very difficult. Most sickle cell anemia children don't live very long.
Right. Right.
And again, in mouse models, they have created blindness. They have cured blindness
Blindness.
in
Yes.
mouse with
Yep.
CRISPR. And I know you are a vision scientist, and retinosa, pigmentosa, a lot of other
Right.
genetically inherited diseases that
Right.
affects your eyesight are
Mm-hmm.
now already been in mouse models, and they're even applying for permits to see if they can uh, change the genes of this in human beings, and that's what the new genetic technologies. It's truly not, genetic engineering in the classical sense, because it doesn't involve any introduction of foreign DNA, but you change the DNA within. So if you're born, unfortunately, with a mutation, and that has caused blindness. And then by using CRISPR, we can change those genes in the
Reverse.
retina of your eyes, and then you are able to see for the first time. This is an incredible contribution of science that I think we all must be open to it. See, and this is again, if you are blindly opposed to science, you're not only opposed to that part of the science, but you will also prevent the future development of it. You see
Right.
what I mean? And so,
Right.
a lot of times in the beginning, the very first iteration of a scientific product may not be most perfect. Just like
Right.
when we saw the cell phones 20 years ago, they were like a bricks, and
Break.
you
Yeah.
could hardly hear them. But look what has happened today. And so,
Right.
scientific products and science improves. Even our knowledge improves. Sometimes some practices, what we didn't know, we didn't know lead was poisonous. We didn't know asbestos was so deadly. Once we
Right.
come to know, we can get rid of it. So science has a way of correcting itself over time. And that's
Right.
why having a very strong pro-science mindset and promoting and fostering a scientific enterprise in a country like India, because we are blessed with such intellectual environment and vibrant individuals with such dynamic thinking. India can be the number one country in the world in terms of its quality of living, fostered by science, yet grounded in tradition.
Right. That's
Yeah.
good.
In fact, whenever we talk about GMO, there's so much about the health impact of
Right.
using GMO. That is the popular narrative that we see around. And there is also a worry in terms of how does that gene or whatever it is impact our own
Yeah.
genetic structures and DNA? Does that interaction happen within as well when we introduce a foreign
Right.
gene?
No,
So,
those are
what is
valid
your
worries. I understand, and I get that question all the time. And because
Hmm.
as a scientist, I've been working in this area for 30 years, I can give a very good answer to that. First of all, uh, GMO in terms of its effect on health, and also we also look at the effect on the environment. Anytime when we develop a new trait, like the BT cotton, we grow a lot of cotton in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, all over India, and all that it has is a one gene from a bacteria. That bacteria gone everywhere. You can just go outside your house today and get me a pinch of the soil from your house. I can show you the presence of that bacteria literally millions of cells of Bacillus thuringiensis in that bacteria. It's highly prevalent. In fact, organic and natural farmers use that to spray to control caterpillars in that. And so it's a very, very safe bacteria, but very difficult to use to control by spraying. So all scientists did was to take one gene from that bacteria, put it into cotton, and today 99% of the cotton farmers in India grow BT cotton, where they're producing this delta endotoxin protein from the bacteria. Now, the question is, if you eat that cotton, we don't eat cotton, but we do eat cotton seed oil, by the way,
Well, yeah.
and we remove the poison gossip oil from cotton, or we can put it. We also put that into in Bangladesh. They are growing the same in brinjal, that they have put the same gene and they eat it. When you eat that, there is absolutely no negative effect on the human body, simply because this protein is very specific only to the insect and for which it was developed.
Mm.
Because our bodies are we are very acidic in our stomach, the protein is not even released. It just gets digested. Whereas in the insect with alkaline midgut, the protein is cleaved and becomes a toxin, and those insects have receptors that it can bind, and that's how it kills. Whereas we
Right.
don't have a receptor, it doesn't bind. And so, literally, 200, 300 biosafety studies have been done on this particular protein, and not a single evidence of this has harm has come about. And we have used it for the last 30 years. We have done, as you know, I'm sure Sandhya can tell you how food safety here is taken extremely seriously. One small contamination of E. coli or anything
Right. The whole batch.
overflowed, millions of tons are recalled,
Right.
and we don't take any chance at all. We have not had a single instance of harm of growing GM crops in the last 30 years. And so it is safe because we do a lot of tests. It is safe because we use a lot of science. We only take genes from places we know are safe. It's like taking a gene from maize and putting it into rice. What's the worst that can happen, right? And thirdly, we also know now a lot of these things have been happening in nature, and we are not doing it for the first time. Mother Nature has been doing this, and so the the history, the science, and the experience shows that where we can assure people it's very safe. And also, we also have a legal system in America, which is really crazy, because even if there is a small damage or even a semblance of damage, people will go and sue the companies. And so we've not had a single lawsuit on any GMO anywhere, and that shows that there's a fairly good safety record. And it's just that for us it's so new, and I can
Right.
understand anytime a new technology comes. I remember when I first got a microwave oven to my home, and to my mother, when I came back from Australia, I said, "Ma, you got to use this, and this is so good." In our family, nobody would touch that, because it's microwave oven. Oh, I've never seen anything like that. And they are questioned that it keeps sattvika. What is the prana in the food? And they have all the concepts. And I remember my grandmother always used to, when I was a child, used to cook special food during the certain days only on the firewood. She would never even use electricity or gas. You see what I mean? So, but now, if to go to your children, ask them to use firewood, they will laugh at you, right? But these innovations came over time. Even things like use a refrigerator, you see, was called upon. And so I think GMOs are like that. It's just only been 20 years. I think in the next 20, 30 years, it will become very common, because in the US, it's not much controversial. People like, for instance, right next to me, there is a Burger King, and they sell what they call as Impossible Burger. And that was a hamburger with absolutely no animal product in it.
Right.
Everything is 100% plant-based. And so, well, what did they do? They used some combination of mung bean and soybean and all, that came up with some kind of concoction that kind of looks like meat, but it didn't taste like meat. They had to genetically engineer one part of the meat or blood part called heme protein, the like
Hemoglobin.
hemoglobin component heme, that gives it red color and
Mm.
also the taste. And they genetically engineered that in the yeast and put that. And now this company is just selling these burgers like hotcakes, and their stocks have gone up. And I was telling Sandhya that there is two Indians. This one, his name is Ryan Pandya, has started a company called Perfect Day. You can look that up. You can Google Perfect Day. You know what the Perfect Day is trying to do? They are trying to develop milk. In fact, they've already developed milk, cheese, ice cream, all of that without a cow. It tastes like milk. People have, some of my friends, because it's already available in some places in near San Francisco, and they ate that. They said, "Hey, we could not tell the difference." When you take fake milk from soybean or oats or anything, you can tell.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, whereas this one you cannot, because what these people did was to literally take the most important proteins that makes the milk and milk from the cow, and they cloned it, and they are expressed all of that in the yeast. And so, just like producing beer or even yogurt artificially, they produce this, and now we have a cow-free milk, cruelty-free milk being produced. And similarly, an Israeli company is also doing it. And there are a bunch of companies, especially in Israel, where food production is very difficult, but they have some of the brightest people on earth, are coming up with amazing technologies where they are now able to grow meat in the lab. So
Right.
one day, 30, 40 years from now, your um, Sandhya's grandchildren will be asking, do you, in your time, you used to have animals on the farm? Because I
Right.
think one day they will go away, because all the animal products, whether it's milk, meat, or whatever, would be grown in the lab. And
Right.
not only that would be from an ethical point of view, maybe good, but a health point of view will be good because you can make it very healthy, virus free, and all that. But think of all the global warming implications.
Right.
Uh, so that's what the science, can take you, and being open-minded about science. And so that's why a little worry about India in a way, because GM crop cotton was introduced, but afterward, not a single new GM crop was introduced into India because of all the negative uh, negative news about that, the media, the activists, and when you understand that there is a very safe technology behind it, and that Indian scientists are developed many of this. A lot of worry was against companies like Monsanto. They are here for profit. They don't care about Indians, you know. But many of these are being developed. MS Swaminathan Research Foundation,
Right.
right in Madras, has been pioneering development of rice varieties against drought, against salt for the last 20 years. And Dr. Swaminathan is a respected scientist, a
Right.
Bhishmacharya of Indian agriculture,
Right.
and his product is not going to hurt. Anything that they develop is not going to hurt Indian farmers or Indian ecosystem. So I think we need to be open-minded about embracing some of these technologies and trust Indian science and Indian scientists, so that they could take us India into the next level to address current problems. India has some of the most malnourished children in the world are in India. India is the fifth largest economy in the world today, right?
Right.
Yet
Right.
it is on one hand, we are so proud of that we could send a mission to the moon, and so many great achievements, develop a vaccine against COVID
Right.
naturally, indigenously, and tallest statue in the world, all that, and yet we still have children dying of hunger and
Right.
starvation in India still exists. Children getting blind due to vitamin deficiencies still
Right.
exist. And so to solve that, India must think of all the solutions that you have in mind and examine all of that and see
Right.
which one works, and not just discard some tools based on emotion, but only do it on science.
Yeah, that's good. And I was also thinking, like, you mentioning about or like the amount of technology we use and stuff like that. I think one of the reasons that I've commonly heard, at least, is the reason why people are opposed or apprehensive to these kind of things is they
Yeah.
feel like when you're mass producing something, like for example, the green revolution that we just spoke about, like the one that was developed by MS
Hmm.
Swaminathan, he's known for that. And so what happens is again, I would say, I don't know if this is a misconception or if this is fact. I think that's why you should probably help us understand that. Is when you have to produce something in bulk, because it's a need of the hour, and there is a
Yes.
demand for producing things in bulk,
Mhm.
especially food. So to cater to the large numbers, there is compromise on the quality.
Right.
So in terms of nutrition, like just because I have to feed hundreds of thousands of people, I need more quantity than quality. So that is kind of impacting, even though the
Right.
food is available, it's not nutritious. So I think that is one of the reasons why people
And
feel
again,
that.
right, Sanjay. I agree. I know. A lot of us think that way, and there is many cases it is true that
Mm,
when you do something raw, you might compromise the quality. But it's again with modern business practices, modern industrial and science. It is really the other way around, because when
okay.
you look at it in India, you have thousands of little shops, okay, and thousands of little restaurants. And the first thing I do when I go to Bangalore is to go eat in a darshini, because I
Actually,
love
yeah,
standing in the footpath and
right,
eating that idli dosa. I can never get that in a five-star hotel where usually I go
right,
stay these days when I come.
yeah,
But on the other hand, but there is also now a move towards mass production, mass processing of the food because of the technologies that have come about. Supermarkets have come, okay, where a lot of this is bought in bulk, aggregated, and treated, and very hygienically packed. And so if I go to India now, and if you have the money, if many of you are probably up middle class or upper middle class, and where do they go buy their food today? They go to the supermarket. Why do
Right.
they trust their supermarket better than a khajana, a little corner shop, or the lady who's selling the little vegetables on the street? Is
Right.
because the it, you know with proper practice, and also we need very good regulation and oversight, we can make food safer and healthier when it is produced and handled en masse. Just think of milk, okay, is one good example. When I was growing up in Chamrajpet, in Bangalore, our milk used to come from a guy who used to have two or three cows next door. He would
Right.
just, get the milk, and I grew up drinking unpasteurized milk. There was no thing called
Right.
pasteurization in early 60s. But
Right.
today, look at India has somehow managed to keep that elements of still people have two, three cows, and yet they are able to bring an element of mass processing of that milk. But you know
Right.
what that has helped? That has brought a great level of safety, because
Right.
now you can pasteurize it. Now you can, in a very unhygienic condition, keep it under the cold, transport it all over, and sell
Right.
it in a manner that the consumers trust. And so you
Right.
see here, this is a good example where really the safety was lacking in the system which was before the traditional.
Right.
And that was fine when people were very little. There were thousands of people with cows everywhere, and by bringing more modern element to it, you can make it safe, and they are tested. And if there is any milk batch that we know is contaminated, immediately it could be removed. But if
Right.
there are a million people producing that milk, and if there is a problem, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
So the economies of scaling it up, also brings in elements of science and modern practices that help improve the system.
Right. Okay. So moving on to I think we are almost running out of time. So I thought let's move on to the next topic. I think you've already touched about the innovation and the use of the transfers technology in agriculture. And if you could, give us a brief about what exactly, like, we see artificial intelligence, we see a lot of that being used in our daily
Yeah,
life, but it's really interesting to know that the same technology is being used even in agriculture.
absolutely. In India,
Right.
there are companies now that have started in India. Venture capitalists have funded them,
Mm-hmm.
and some of these young people with extraordinary ideas are literally transforming the farm. It's not the kind of farm your grandmother would have seen.
Right.
And these are the, like, there is a, for instance, there is a huge 200 acres or 300 hectare greenhouse outside Hyderabad, where every plant is receives the kind of attention more than an ICU patient would receive in a hospital, in an Apollo hospital, for instance. And
Right.
this is the kind of technology they are growing with those tomato plants, where the amount of water that gets into is measured, the temperature and it's controlled with sensors. And then the farmers in India are using drones to spray pesticides. You see, so much of pesticide used in India is wasted because they just dump it, or just spray it at old style, and many of it gets drifted away. And these are, instead of using, say, 1 kilogram of pesticide on a hectare, now they could use micro dosing with using drones, and put pesticides sprayed in the right place, so that you can only use, instead of 1 kilogram, maybe 10 grams, maybe all we
Right.
needed. And so the pesticide residue is very less. And the same way with
Right.
fertilizer application, artificial intelligence is being used to understand the soil fertility gradients. Okay, so what they are doing, it's in the US, it's already been done very high level, is that every square inch of land, farmers now have data points of literally hundreds of things related to that. What is the level of nitrogen, potassium, fertilizer? What is its pH? What's its many of the chemistry related to that, so that when we are growing a crop, when we need to apply fertilizer, when you need to apply water, we do it in a custom manner. It's like giving a personalized medicine to the patient
Right.
depending on all your parameters. We do that
Right.
into the plant. We have, people are talking about driverless cars here in America. As you know, we have had
Right.
driverless tractors here in agriculture 5 years ago. And
Mm,
so the technology is developing so fast. I believe agriculture, more than any other area, will benefit from technology, whether it's internet, IoTs, where the Internet of Things, with everything has a sensor and transmitting its information, so it could be coordinated. So a farmer sitting in nice air-conditioned environment is controlling the whole farm, his operation. She or she would have all the information, what needs to be done. She would know where, in which section of the farm is dry, that needs to be watered, where it is ready for harvest. And so it's not future, this is already happening. And convergence of technologies related to artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the use of sophisticated equipment like drones and autonomous tractors. And again, we use computational biology in the development of many of these crop plants,
right.
using very high speed genomics is helping develop crop plants that are suited, that are tailored to be grown in Madurai. One variety of tomato is different from another variety of tomato that could be grown in Tanjore. You see what I mean? And so
Right.
it is all about, I think, the knowledge. The more knowledge you have, the more you can do about it, whether it is controlling the COVID epidemic, or creating a better tomato that's more flavorful and more tastier, that can grow irrespective of the vagaries of global climate change. It is the knowledge based approach that is helping us get what we are.
Right.
Whether it's medicine, agriculture, environment, or science, that increasing knowledge is going to make us live better, and live in a say that we leave the world in a better shape for our children
Yeah.
and their grandchildren.
Right.
And in fact, what is interesting about some of these technologies is that while research might be a little expensive on them, for the end user, actually, many of these technologies are quite inexpensive that way. That is what
Exactly.
I've noticed. Quite accessible. Yeah, quite accessible. Yeah.
Exactly, and we need to strive hard to make it accessible. A lot of times it may not be so. So that is why we need good laws. Yeah, many of these tech companies they're all profit driven, and so they want to make the most profit. But at the same time, if you have regulations and laws that they should not be monopoly, and also we should have a good private sector competition too. When you make it open, I think the cell phone is the greatest example of what can happen, because I remember the time when cell phone came into India, mobile phones. There were very few people. Once I was walking around in MG Road in Bangalore talking, and people are looking at me. Where did this guy come from outside? No, talking on a phone without a line. I had just come and I didn't realize people are looking at me. But today, nobody, they still look at me if I take an old flip type phone. Who is this guy coming from the old times to using the
Yeah.
flip type phone? You see what I mean? That India,
Yeah.
just in the matter of 20 years, it advanced so much. A 1-year-old baby in India is now, flipping the phone
Everywhere.
or
Yeah.
iPad. And just
Right.
imagine, this one phone has made it so affordable, and it has brought literally 3,000, 4,000 gadgets into this phone. And even people with minimal education can use this in so profound ways it can have. And so, and that's, you see, if India was not open to cell phone technology, just imagine if government, in my growing time, I had to wait 8 years to get a phone at home. Okay, if the Indian government had not helped facilitate this technology, it's still like that in some places, like in South Korea and other places. I mean, sorry, in North Korea, where they can't get a phone, mobile phone. How poor we would have been. in terms of
Right.
not being able to access any of this. When the pandemic came last year around this time, most Indian parents were forced to go and have their children learn at home through Zoom. And thank God, because of mobile phones,
Right.
they were able to still do that, right?
Right.
And
Right.
it's like that. Today, a farmer in India and Tamil Nadu Agriculture University every day sends custom information to all your paddy farmers, tomato farmers, and other farmers, depending on where they are, what type of soil they have, what type of. They will
Mm.
warn them about the weather. They will tell them about the market, and they'll tell them about the credit. And so this is all knowledge and information. It has empowered our Indian farmers to be the owners of their destiny, to get the best value for their product, and to use the most modern science based practices into
Right.
their farming.
Right. Um, and I also read that your lab was the first to develop a transgenic potato and peanut plants. So can you tell us a little about that? I thought that was
Sure,
really
yeah. I mean,
interesting.
this was many years ago when doing something for the first time, and
Mm-hmm.
was something of value, not anymore. So this was way back in the early 90s when I moved to Tuskegee University. I started working on two crops, sweet potato and groundnut.
Oh,
So the
yeah.
two crops were, which was quite famous. There was a well-known scientist called George Washington Carver, who used to work in this university, was very well known for developing many of these products, primarily for poor people in the South. Uh, and I started working on this, and my lab was the first to develop GMOs in these
Mm.
crops. And now there the considerable research goes on, including here in ICRISAT. In fact, we trained some of the people in ICRISAT for the first time so that they could uh, do the genomic studies and genetic modification studies. And today, ICRISAT is a world center
Right.
for that, and we take a lot of pride that we work with them in their formative stages. So those is, I work in a small university where research is not the most high priority. We are primarily into teaching, but
Mm.
nevertheless, at those days, my lab made a good headway in not only developing uh, GM crops of groundnut and sweet potato, but also in developing DNA tools to study their variation and how the biodiversity exists in these crops, how
Right.
one variety is related to another variety, kind of things that helpful for us in breeding newer types.
Right. All right. I think this comes to our last segment. We already touched upon this. We're talking
Okay.
about lab produced meat. So, so is there a difference between lab based meat and plant based meat? Um,
Yes,
and
yes.
and if you could also talk about the dairy products, and is this a good way for producing dairy products which are not allergic? Like, we have a lot of people, especially in America, we have a lot of people
Mm,
who are lactose intolerant. So do you think this is a better
yeah,
way for people to consume dairy so that they don't develop any kind of
absolutely. That's a
reaction?
very good
Yeah.
question. And all of us as Asians have some degree of lactose intolerance
Mm-hmm.
because only the Europeans evolved to eat dairy, and the
Mm-hmm.
rest of us, them, we all imported it. Although we have a big, Lord Krishna was known for dairy and milk. We have it in the mythology, but still, like when my son was born, first when we were in Australia, we didn't know what was happening with us as a baby. Then we realized that he had lactose intolerance, and then we
Mm-hmm.
switched him to soybean, then all his problems disappeared.
Right.
So today, as I mentioned, many companies, including one called the Perfect Day here in the United States, is trying to produce milk artificially
Right.
uh, in the lab. But those milk can be custom made. We can even make a chocolate milk if necessary in the lab. The technology, the possibilities are endless, and those milk are naturally lactose free. See, lactose is a sugar that is in the part of the milk, and those we can produce any other sugar. We can produce sugarless milk if
Right.
necessary. And so I don't know all the technical details of this,
Right.
and many of these companies don't necessarily provide. But on the other hand, uh, the possibilities exist to custom make a milk based on, if you think you like goat's milk, like our Gandhiji used to like, we can develop goat's milk in the lab, you
Right.
see. And you also asked a question about what's the difference between those lab-based meat and plant-based meat that's
Right.
coming up. Okay, lab-based meat is purely meat. So if you're a vegetarian, you don't want to touch that,
Okay.
you know, because
Mm.
that is only for people who like to eat beef or ham or lamb or whatever. But for reasons like ethics, they may not want to eat meat from a slaughtered animal,
Right.
or they may think these animals are contributing to the global warming, and there is a small percentage of that they
Right.
do. And so, for ethical, environmental reasons, or health reasons, because a lot of people worried when pig a disease similar to COVID came about 15 years ago, and it was coming from pigs, and they literally killed millions and millions of pigs all
Mm-hmm.
over the world. And so people worry about eating meat. When you always hear in the
Right.
US, no, you get E. coli contaminated,
Mm-hmm.
hamburgers recalled, and things like that. So there is a
Mm-hmm.
safety issue from this, and the cholesterol and dietary issue
Right.
too. For those reasons, there are companies now experimenting, and we don't have it on the market, and
Right.
these are still very cost prohibitive, but there are some incredibly good results and proof of concept that we have seen from these companies in the labs, where now they can grow meat in the lab, literally in the test tubes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I've seen interviews with people who have tasted these, and they say they can't tell the difference
Mm-hmm.
from the real meat. At this stage, it's still cost prohibitive, and the technology needs to be scaled up. They were done in
Right.
small scales, as with any science, it always starts small, and
Right.
if there are no other hurdles, it would come up. And if there is a mass market, then it would be more affordable. You see,
Right.
like cell phones,
Yeah.
computers cost $10,000. I remember the
Yeah.
first one, the cell phones used to cost so much. So the price will come down, and I think that for environmental, ethical, health reasons, we are going to see more and more of those products
Right.
in the future.
Right. Yeah. So okay. Yeah, that's good to know because it's sometimes there's a lot of these words are being used. Like the other day I went to a cafe and there was a vegan sausage burger, and I'm a vegetarian myself, and I was like, do I okay? Like there was no other vegetarian options, and this was the only option that was available, and
Right,
I was contemplating. I was like, okay, is this purely plant based, or is there, like you said, lab
right.
grown meat is definitely not for people
Yeah,
who are
the
vegetarians.
plant-based, and I didn't say much about it. The plant-based burger would be purely plant. It's essentially a
Right,
concoction, a lot of things, and each burger has their own proprietary way where
right.
they make that. Most of that uses dal, really mung dal and
Lentils.
tur
Yep.
dal and all kinds of dal, because they tend to be good in protein and the
Right,
texture. But still, we always had that. You could go even 30 years ago and buy a fake meat made from soybean. But
right,
people who eat meat tell me it never tasted like meat.
right. Yeah,
So they never really accepted it. It's only for a very small group of people who wanted to avoid meat, but wanted to see it taste something like meat, but eating it, but they were never getting that taste. But today, some of these hamburgers and meat substitute taste like meat, although they're made from plants in the lab. They are completely very highly processed food with so many components that literally assembled together to taste like meat, smell like meat, and the key is that scientists have identified some flavor compounds in the meat, like heme
mm,
protein is one of them.
right. The
That's
blood.
part of the
Yeah,
hemoglobin. And so they have genetically engineered those genes and produced these heme proteins in large quantities, primarily in the yeast. And then they use it as a food flavoring uh,
right.
to bring out the flavor in the food. And that has made this product very acceptable
Mm,
in the United States and many other places. And this is completely um, plant-based meat-like substance.
mm. That's no. This is all like really interesting, and I wouldn't say new information. I know it's all out there. It's just that there's so much of inhibition and people. There's a lot of information, and there's also a lot of misinformation. So it's
That's
pretty
right. It will
confusing.
always be there, and that's why, especially in this social media time with
Right.
WhatsApp, you get people send all kinds of
Yes.
junk information, but you also get good information.
Right.
So,
Right.
as a layperson, we're all layperson. I may be good in biotech, but when somebody
Yeah.
tells me, those cell phones cause cancer, I worry about it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so it is our natural thing. And I want, especially if you're a mother, you want to absolutely make sure your children, you give the best.
Right.
You don't want to give them anything that's harmful to them. And so, how do you make these decisions? So it's not easy. That's why I say, listen to the trusted sources.
Right.
If you have a question about vaccine, don't ask your next door neighbor.
Mm,
You can talk to them, but for science information, talk to your doctor and information on things like GMOs. Listen to scientists like me, and look at where you're getting that information, and always be skeptical. Ask them questions.
right. Right.
Science, we get a lot of rubbish in science. People do small studies with just one animal study and say, "Oh, this
Yeah.
works." So
Right.
you need to know whether there is a scientific consensus and
Mm,
what are so it is not easy to wade through this mass of information, and
right.
that's why we need to have uh, podcasts like yours. And I wish you good luck with your podcast, where
Mhm.
I hope you bring all this every day. Tremendous amount of knowledge is coming out,
Right.
new information, but there's a cacophony of this, and we can't process it. Our mind cannot. And so you need to bring people who can explain some
Right.
of the science, developing science, into a manner that your grandmother can understand.
Exactly.
Or,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
and then process with it.
Right. So if I walk into a supermarket now and then I see, this is all non-GMO, or if I find something which has GMO, I don't have to worry, right? Because
Absolutely. In fact, if you say something GMO, like now we have many of these products are
right.
labeled. It's like
Yep.
Impossible Burger comes with a label that is engineered, and this
Even
milk.
fruits and all the mandarins that you get in the supermarket, they all come with a sticker says all non-GMO.
Non-GMO,
So
I know that's bullshit, because there is no GMO counterpart to that, and that's simply they're scaring you in saying it's non-GMO, buy it. And so if I were you, I would not pay more money to buy something that says non-GMO, because
mhm,
there is no scientific basis for that. In most of those countries, there is no GMO at all, so you should don't have to pay more to do that, and that's deceptive marketing practices. It's kind of like they could as well say this fruit has not been touched by a ghost, okay, and buy it. It's kind of as silly as that. And so that I hope will go away. But at the same time, I do hope there's a greater acceptance of many of the products developed through science, because these go through the vetting process, go through the regulatory testing process, and that way you will have a much healthier produce, healthier food than otherwise.
okay. We have another 10 minutes, and I want to briefly ask another question.
Sure.
And now there's a lot of now I think organic is the other thing. I mean, we've pretty much used organic in the olden days, and
Yeah.
then we're back to using organic these days. But when they say organic, how much of it is organic? Like, what percentage of it is organic? Is it like completely 100%, or
Yeah. I
I was shocked to know, like I was talking to somebody and that person told me that, oh, when they say organic, it's only 30 or 40%, or maybe there's a range of percentage. But I was surprised to know that it's not all organic as how we perceive it as.
Exactly. See, what we used to do when, in the olden days, there was organic, there was nothing synthetic. There was no synthetic chemicals that we used to apply it in the farm to our food. And whether it is pesticides or fertilizers. Those are the only two things, or maybe antibiotics and other things come in the way. Never used to use any of that. So that was okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean they were healthy
Right.
in the sense because we live with it. And those were okay. Those were simpler times.
Right.
Those were simpler times and there were fewer people. But today, the food has to be produced to a large number of people. And so you cannot have, every family cannot afford to have their own little backyard farm to grow
Right.
all their food. That's how
Right.
food was in the previous days.
Mm.
In the United States, for instance, we had 80% of the people doing farming during the time of Civil War 150 years ago. And
Right.
today, only 2% do of Americans are in farming, and yet they feed 98% of the rest of the people and also
Mm.
export a lot. And but the new organic definition that has come about was a kind of backlash against the industrialized farming and some of the excesses of that, because there was justifiably there's a extreme rampant use of fertilizers and pesticides, and to a certain extent it's happened in India, Punjab and Haryana. There's too much of that, and you see that all over India too. So there is a backlash, and people were naturally wanted to go back into the times when things were very simple and they didn't have any chemical additives. But unfortunately, what has happened is it's not easy to get you tomatoes for costing 10 rupees a kilogram, okay, and yet be organically grown, because these tomatoes need nutrients to grow, and
Right.
tomatoes have all the kinds of pests and diseases. And to be grown in a large scale, you need to control them. It's easy when you have growing 3 tomato plants in your backyard where you can remove the little caterpillars, right? You can't
Right.
do that when you're growing 3 acres or 30 acres. And so current organic farm practice, so they had to come up with a lot of regulations,
Right.
what they can use and what they cannot. And in US, there is a fairly highly stringent regulation. And so the level of pesticide residues that can be found in organic produce is less. But on the other hand, they also allow a lot of pesticides to be used on the organic farms. Those pesticides tend to be so-called natural and
Right.
not synthetic. It doesn't
Okay.
mean that they are not dangerous. It just has to come from natural sources.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like neem oil. If you use neem oil, then it's
Right.
organic. Or I mentioned Bacillus thuringiensis earlier, a bacteria that can kill
Right.
caterpillars. You can spray that. It's very safe. But there are also some neurotoxins and others were allowed. Now they don't allow copper sulfate, which is it's very inorganic. Just
Mm.
because it has been used for hundreds of years, they allow them. But copper, any chemistry student would know, is
Yeah.
toxic.
Toxic. Yeah.
And also, there is a lot of cheating that goes on, and that's what I mean. In India, I have seen studies where they took this organic produce and tested it, and they found a lot of pesticide residues in them. It may be either because of cheating or it may be because of the drift. This organic farm may be 1 acre, it may be surrounded by 10 acres of non-organic, and they all spray pesticide, and so you will also get that. And so it's not easy to trust what you find in a supermarket in India. And when you end up paying 2 3 times more on these organic
Right.
food, costs a
Yeah.
lot
It's
of money. I've been to many of these organic stores,
right.
and it's a big, some of them are just big rackets. That is why I think we need a better enforcement and better regulation of those in India. But on the other hand, if you allow biotechnology to prosper in India, biotechnology will make many of the produce with less chemicals, less agrochemicals, and much healthier. Is a better way. I would look forward to the day in India where everything would going to be organic, but everything will also be guided by science. You see, so
That's
in
a
that way, you take the best of the spirit of organic, where people don't want any nasty chemicals in their food and grown in a very manner that is harmonious with nature,
right.
not cause any destructive to the land, to the air, to the water. But at the same time, you have 1.5 billion people, and they are fed in a food that was that they can buy it in an affordable manner, and yet produced with sustainability in mind. And so we can bring the best of science and the best of tradition uh, together, like we've done in India in so many ways.
Right, right. I think that's a good way to end the podcast, emphasizing on the importance of using both or basically everything that the knowledge that we have, like in form
Right.
of indigenous sciences or biological sciences or genetical sciences, and see what works, and then embrace whatever
Exactly.
works,
You
which
see,
is great. Yeah.
right. You see, if like right now, when I have a little throat irritation, I immediately first thing I do is like what my grandma used to do. I will take a little hot water, put some salt, and I gargle, or I take lemon and honey. But at the
Right.
same time, I know if it's getting a little bored, then I'm
Worse.
going to go get a strep test.
So, right.
See,
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
make sure. So and these are not mutually exclusive. when
Right.
you when you have some practices, and so many great things have come out of India that are now become a worldwide staple. They don't even know yoga and meditation. They even change the name for that. They call it mindfulness these
Right.
days, right? And yet these are some of the great traditions that came from our country, and I think they will continue to help enlighten the world. And at the same time, we also must borrow and use things from outside that
Right.
may help our quality, just like we have embraced in so many other ways. You want
Right.
in medical technology, you want the best and most modern technology that you can
Right.
to help cure your diseases. When you go into your hospital, now you expect that. And it's the same with food and agriculture too.
Right.
Yeah, in fact,
So on that note, I think thank you very much for your time, Dr. Prakash, and it was great talking to you. And there was a lot of good information that you shared with us, and I hope our audience also, understand and like whatever misconceptions they had about GMO or other things that we practice, and they take it as a cue to look up stuff before judging that something is harmful or it's not beneficial to us. Thank you once again, for giving us your time, and we look forward to talking to you maybe in future about other topics
Certainly.
and other concepts. And please share and subscribe to our channel. We have many such interesting conversations coming up in our future episodes. So keep watching, and nothing is rocket science. Thank you, and we'll see you once again.
Thank you, Sandhya and Smriti. Bye bye.